Hey GAWDA members, welcome to another episode of GAWDA TV. The temperature is cold, but things are heating up at GAWDA. Registration for this year's SMC in Oklahoma City will open later this month. Register early because it's an event you definitely won't want to miss. We also have our first two regional meetings of the year taking place this month. The Southwest Regional will take place in Sonoma, California from February 10th to the 12th, while the Northeast Regional will take place in Killington, Vermont from February 23rd to the 25th. If you missed them, we had the opportunity to interview the co-chairs for each of these events on previous episodes of GAWDA TV. Click the links in the description below to learn more about each of these amazing events. Registration's also open now for the Southeast Regional, which will take place March 23rd to the 24th in Stone Mountain, Georgia. The link to register can also be found in the description below. Here to tell us more about these amazing events is GAWDA's Vice President of Operations and Administration, Natasha, Alexis.
Thank you, Steve, for the opportunity to share several in-person opportunities for GAWDA members to gather and come together. We all know that these connections are really the backbone to GAWDA, this industry, these relationships that are developed in these meeting environments. We're going to kick off first with our regional meeting, the Southwest Regional Meeting in Sonoma, California, happening just in a couple of days. Excited to launch that one. Next is another new regional meeting location in Killington, ski country, later on this month, February 23rd through 25th. There should be registration information still on GAWDA.org. And if you're having issues with hotel, reach out directly to the regional meeting chairs. Again, information online. Following that in March is Stone Mountain, Georgia. Again, a new location for GAWDA regional meetings. Then Seven Springs in July, Bellevue, Washington later Seven Springs in June, correction there, Steve. Bellevue, Washington in July. And then to end, the regional meeting will be the Central in South Bend, Indiana. We are excited to launch registration for the Spring Management Conference later this month. Excited about that. And we're just getting back from the annual planning meeting and for the upcoming annual convention in Boston. Very excited to head back to that historical city. Please check in at GAWDA.org for information about any of these meetings that we shared with you today, or you can reach out to anyone on the GAWDA headquarters team. Lots of exciting developments happening at GAWDA. Stay tuned for the next episode. Back to you, Steve.
Again, the registration links for this year's first three regional meetings can be found in the description below. We've got a great show lined up for you today, so stick around right after a word from today's presenting sponsor, Weldcoa. Every year, the first quarter issue of Welding Guesses Today features forecasts from around the industry. We interview GAWDA distributors and suppliers, as well as sister organizations like the CGA and AWS. This year, we were lucky enough to also hear from close friend of the association, Alex Chausovsky, President and CEO of 3DM Consulting. Alex, thank you for being with us today. You spoke at the GAWDA annual convention last year in Tampa, and you'll also be addressing members in 2026. So you're very attuned to our industry. What do you expect from the gas and welding economy in 2026?
Well, as we hopefully leave the tumultuousness of 2025 behind, I would call it cautiously optimistic that this year will be slightly better than what we saw from the industrial economy overall, and specifically for GAWDA members' businesses. Kind of as a result of that, we have some momentum in relevant data series coming into the year. So if you look at things like industrial production, for example, which is a great benchmark for anyone doing business in the B2B space, that is really starting to accelerate off of a low point in late 2025. And we're not sure how quick that momentum is going to go. Obviously, policy agenda might throw a wrench in the works. Things like Venezuela and potentially Greenland or attacking Iran, these kind of black swan events could absolutely prove to be disruptive. But I do think with the passage of the tax bill in mid 2025, a lot of that uncertainty is now off the table. People are looking at the interest rate environment and saying, well, we haven't seen as much of a pullback in interest rates as we'd like, but there has been, a point and a half. We're lower now in terms of borrowing costs. And there's been a lot of kind of hold your ground views in 2025 that can't continue forever, right? Business needs to evolve and grow. And so we're starting to see some cautious, but, opening up of order books and volumes and things like that. I would not think that we're going, mid-single digit or high single digit growth. But I think the economy, specifically the industrial part of the economy, will give you kind of that low 2 to 3, maybe upwards of 4 or 5% growth this year. If you want something more than that as an individual company in the space that GAWDA members operate in, you're really going to have to rely on things like market share growth, new customer acquisition. So basically, the economy is going to have, in my view, a little bit less of a headwind to us this year as it did last year. But it's also going to be dependent on companies and how they react to that, how effectively they execute their sales strategies. Are they able to pick up some market share? Are they able to get some new customers that they didn't have before? If you can do that, then you can achieve some better outcomes. Otherwise, the economy is going to give you relatively minimal growth in 2026.
You touched on interest and inflation, and those are the discussions that have really dominated the discussion for the last several years. As we move into this year, what do you expect to see, and how will those factors impact GAWDA members?
Yeah, well, I think it makes sense to start the response with a commentary on interest rate policy. So, when you think about interest rates as they pertain to the business environment, there's essentially three layers of interest rates. There is the top layer, which is what's called restrictive interest rate policy. That's when the federal funds rate, which of course dominates and sets the rates for everything else: borrowing costs, mortgages, auto loans, any kind of borrowing activity on the business side. Anytime that federal funds rate is at 4% or higher, that's called restrictive. That means that the Fed is actively trying to slow down demand, to slow the economy. And they're doing so because they're trying to keep a lid on inflation, on price increases. So we are now not in that space for the first time in a couple of years. For 2023 and much of 2024, we were in that restrictive interest rate policy domain. Because of the cuts in interest rate that we saw over the course of 2025, we're now in what I call neutral. So that's anytime the Fed funds rate is somewhere between 3 and 4%, that's called neutral territory. That means the Fed isn't using interest rates to slow the economy, but they're also not using low cost of borrowing to stimulate the economy either. They're just not getting in the way, basically. And so that's where we find ourselves today, right around 3.5% on the federal funds rate. Most projections have them cutting once, maybe twice more in 2026. I don't think we're going to get a cut at the January meeting, for example. The latest numbers on the job market were good enough to stave that off. Inflation is also not misbehaving too much. So I think they're going to adopt a little bit of a wait and see mentality. I imagine that March will probably be the time that they make a move of some kind. But even coming down from 3.5 to 3%, that doesn't get us out of that neutral territory. In order to get stimulative, where the Fed creates enough fiscal and monetary momentum in the economy in terms of low borrowing costs, encouraging investment, we would need to be below 3%. And really, it's below 2% on the federal funds rate. And if you look at the way that the Fed has been telegraphing their future interest rate policy, they're indicating they're not planning on going into that low interest rate environment anytime soon. Not in 2027, not in 2028. And their long-term rates kind of holding around that 3% mark. So I think that we should not expect interest rates to be kind of that major catalyst of the next leg upwards in the US economy. Now, on the flip side of that, obviously, interest rates are responsive to inflation. Inflation is really hard to predict right now because while we're clearly not at the 2% target that the Fed has, we're not far from it, right? The latest reading that we saw was 2.7% on core, 2.6% on the overall CPI. CPI is the consumer price index, which is how you and I feel inflation in our day-to-day lives. There's also PPI, that's the producer price index. That's how companies feel inflation a little bit more. And so we've got a benign inflationary environment in that regard. And I think that the big question in my mind is, much of the early onset lack of understanding of the implications of tariffs has now been kind of felt, right? We're through that period of uncertainty right now. We know that even if the Supreme Court rules that the IEEPA, or the International Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs that President Trump has used to set all of these reciprocal tariffs at the country level, even if the Supreme Court judges those to be unconstitutional and reverses them, the administration has already clearly signaled a shift towards more Section 232 tariffs, which is the congressionally approved product category oriented tariffs, right? So I think it's very evident that tariffs aren't going away. Not in 2026, not in 2027. As long as President Trump is in office, that's going to be the name of the game. So the question in my mind is, as we have this kind of working of the tariffs through the system, on average, tariff can take anywhere between 9 and 18 months to fully work itself through in terms of price effects, right? So as they work themselves through, it'll be really interesting to see what that does to inflation, right? Right now, my expectation is inflation ends 2026 somewhere around where we are today, somewhere in that 3, 4, maybe upwards of like that 5% mark, but not substantially higher. So we're certainly not going back to 9% or 10% inflation that we had back in 21 or 2022. That should also be somewhat conducive to businesses starting to come to life a little bit more than they were last year. So overall, policy agenda, I think, is going to be a little bit more stable when it comes to the macroeconomy. We've got a lot of the questions from last year have been answered, at least in terms of taxation and things of that nature. And I think that will ease the headwinds facing GAWDA members and other industrial companies in 2026, and hopefully beyond that as well.
Speaking of stability, you gave an educational track presentation at the SMC about labor availability and wage pressures. Can you give an update on that, and if you see any relief to those pressures in the near future?
Yeah, the labor market is such an interesting thing to talk about right now because we've had a true transformation with regards to immigration policy and in regards to the amount of people that are actively coming into the country to take all of those blue collar, physically demanding jobs that most Americans don't want to do. I'm talking about frontline manufacturing, construction, agriculture, and also a lot of the front facing like customer service, leisure and hospitality, people that clean hotel rooms, people that are in the retail environment. Like it's hard to find workers. The labor market data has been a little bit of a head scratcher for many people because they say, well, job openings are down. They're not as high as they were. The number of jobs that we're adding on a monthly basis are much lower, specifically since April of last year, which is, of course, coincident to that Liberation Day, April 2nd announcement where President Trump held up those placards and showed what the new tariff rates on all of the countries was going to be. Since that point, we've got an average of only about 12,000 jobs per month that we added in the US economy. Prior to that, it was over 100,000 per month on average. So a huge difference. But what's happening is we're not seeing the unemployment rate go up as a result of this, which is a little bit kind of confusing to most people. But what is affecting that is the denominator isn't growing. The US labor force is not growing. And so it doesn't take as many labor job gains to maintain the unemployment rate where we are right now, which last month it actually pulled back from 4.6% to 4.4%, even though we only added about 50,000 jobs. Now, getting to the heart of your question, I think even throughout the 23, 24, 25 timeframe, we saw certain positions be very, very difficult to fill. And I would say that that is true as we head into 2026 as well. So I'm thinking about engineers, I'm thinking about accountants, I'm thinking about real experienced mid-level management personnel, not people that get promoted into management. Let's say you're a good salesperson and all of a sudden you're a sales manager. I'm talking about people that have experience managing people, that have experience dealing with personal issues and personalities and all of the stuff that goes into people management, right? So the unemployment rate for those types of positions, engineering, accounting, management, is somewhere in the 2.5% range. It's like half of the normal unemployment. So those people remain very, very difficult to find. And then I think what we'll see is an increase in the difficulty to fill some of those entry level blue collar jobs, because prior we had a influx of workers that were willing to do those jobs at relatively low wage that we no longer have. I mean, we've obviously seen a cutoff of that. Last year, as an example, we actually lost about 100,000 manufacturing jobs in the United States. And this is despite the fact that President Trump's goal originally was to bring back US manufacturing. We haven't really seen that happen so far. So what I will say is that the labor challenges that GAWDA members face are not going to go away in 2026. In fact, they're likely to exacerbate in 2026. And a big driver of that is the state of demographic change. So the exit of the labor market by the boomers, their replacement or lack of replacement by the younger generations, especially in industrial roles, right? So Gen Z, the younger millennials, they think that my only path forward in a career is to get a college degree or to become a social media influencer, right? Those are the only two things that are available to them, which of course in reality isn't true. There's tons of great paying and great need for jobs in the trades, right? Things like plumbing and electrical and HVAC and other things like that. So I think that the challenges of the labor market will persist. In fact, one of the things that I recommend to people to do is there's a really interesting report put out by a company called Lightcast. I'm not actually affiliated with Lightcast in any way, but I just found that their research is quite compelling on this topic. It's called The Rising Storm. And this report basically talks about that without fixing the legal immigration system in conjunction with stopping the flow of illegal immigration, as early as 2027, we're starting to lose a couple of 100,000 people from the U.S. labor force every single year because we're not replicating ourselves fast enough, right? The birth rate is too low. Without immigration, basically, these challenges that labor has faced are only going to get more acute. So I think that in order for GAWDA members to continue to stay ahead of this, they've got to rise above in terms of competitiveness, in terms of attractiveness to potential talent. They really have to have a solid value proposition of why somebody would want to come and work for them. So you really have to differentiate yourself as an employer in order to win in this kind of environment. So my recommendation to anyone listening out there is make sure that you continue to work on your talent strategy. This is not a you do it once and you set it to the side. It's a evolution, and you've got to be measuring things. You can only improve what you measure, right? So look at your various data sets. How often do you get resumes when you put a job opening out there? What is your offer to acceptance rate, for example? For every job offer you give, how often are people actually accepting it versus turning it down? Things like that. You've got to be able to keep that data, assess it, figure out what directionality it has, and then make adjustments on the fly. So that would be my recommendation.
Given the challenges that our industry has faced in recent years with supply chain issues, energy costs, geopolitical uncertainty, and other things that are largely out of our control, what are some of the economic indicators or data points that GAWDA members should track closely?
So there are leading economic indicators that consistently are able to predict, at minimum, the directionality, the momentum in the market, if not the exact growth trajectory. Those are typically hard data points. So if you use industrial production, which I referenced earlier, a few of the key economic leading indicators that I look at are things like capacity utilization rate. So that typically predicts the industrial economy to the tune of about 6 months into the future. I look at copper futures prices because copper is so prevalently used in industrial economy that it has a 9 month lead time to the industrial sector. And then the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, has a full year, 12 months lead time to industrial production. I also look at things that are not hard data, but rather reflect sentiment. So consumer confidence, CEO confidence. It's not necessarily indicative of recession or not, but what you see is that after a certain amount of time, if consumer confidence or CEO confidence is in the dumps, they start to actually change their behavior. They stop spending money. So watch for those inputs and kind of gauge kind of how the wind is blowing, if you will, in terms of how confident people are feeling about that. And then on the geopolitical side, I think it's really important for folks to understand that having a single strategy these days is not the recipe for success. There are so many different variables in play geopolitically, politically, economically. We live in a very complex world, right? Policy oriented, laws and regulations change all the time, that you almost have to be prepared for a variety of different outcomes. And you have to bring kind of a war games mentality to planning. So you have to say, okay, if scenario A happens, what will we do? What levers will we pull? How will we act? What about if scenario B takes place? How will we change our response? What about scenario C, D, E, and F, and so on and so forth, right? There's only a limit to the extent that you can do it, but maybe you can try the approach of thinking from a business performance perspective. So in the base case scenario, these are the things that we're planning on doing from an internal initiatives perspective. What happens in a worst case scenario? What happens in an optimal scenario? How will those things look from our decision making perspective internally? Like, are we going to pull the trigger on a specific investment or not? What are we going to do about headcount? How do we handle inventory levels? Like, how much inventory do we keep on track? How much do we raise prices next year, given the dynamics between interest rates and inflation? All of these things, you have to play the what if kind of scenario, and don't be committed to a specific course of action regardless of what's happening. You've got to be malleable. You have to be able to adapt as new developments happen. You've got to be able to tweak it and change course in order to keep up with the reality of what's happening in the world around you.
Last question, Alex. Given your familiarity with GAWDA and our membership, do you have any parting words that you can offer before we go today?
Well, I think that first and foremost, there's so much things going on right now that elicit an emotional response from us as individuals, but also as business leaders. And I think that you do yourself a disservice as a leader of an organization if you allow your emotional or fear-based or anxiety-based response to guide your decision-making and your actions. So the first piece of advice I would offer is be data-driven in your decision-making. And with that, you've got to be able to tell which data is reliable and which is not. And that's one of the things that I do here at 3DM Consulting as I work with trade associations like GAWDA, with individual member companies to help them kind of see around the corner, make sense of what's going on around them, find those leading indicators, and be able to strategize and develop plans for a very uncertain future. So if you need some help in that area, I'm certainly happy to do so. Please reach out to me. My email is just alex@3dmconsulting.com. I would say the second element that you need to be aware of is what are the things that you can control in this environment? Focus on those elements. There are a lot of things that I've talked about that are outside of your control, right? What interest rates and inflation does, geopolitical developments, policy, right? What can you control? Well, you can control things like how frequently you engage with your customers and your supply chain partners, right? Increase the frequency of the conversation and try to transform it from a transactional relationship to a value-added partnership. Share information with your contacts. Ask them to share what they're seeing, what they're hearing in exchange with you. That has the real benefit of building a moat around your relationship. And that way, if things do kind of turn south, if there's a recession looming out there, you're not going to be the first one where they look to make cuts, right? They're going to try to preserve that relationship. So that's within your control. Another area of control is, remember that you're in business to make a profit, not to just drive top line revenue growth. I've seen over and over again companies that say, well, look at what we did, in terms of revenue. We grew 6, 7, 8, 9% last year. What about your profits? Oh, well, those were flat or even down in some cases, right? It is your profitability that is the sign of your future success. That's the money that you're going to use to reinvest in the business. So make sure you're maintaining margins, protecting your profitability, and remembering that you're in business to make a profit, not just to drive revenue. And then lastly, I would say for 2026, it's going to be very important is look for ways to improve productivity and efficiency within your company. Be really self-introspective and ask, are we doing things a certain way because that's the best way to do it? Or is it just because we've always done it that way? And look for opportunities to improve that efficiency and productivity. A lot of times, especially these days, that comes in through implementation of new technology, right? Whether that's AI or advanced analytics or any of the things that will allow you to realize those productivity gains and do more with what you've got instead of having to hire more or spend more in order to do more. So if you can accomplish those three things in 2026, I think you're going to have a good year ahead.
Alex, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your words and wisdom today. Next on the show today, we have a very special panel discussion. Member Services Committee member Colleen Kohler had the opportunity to interview the 3 women presidents that GAWDA has had. This year's president, Allison Earlbeck, was joined by 2019 to 2021 president Abydee Butler Moore and 2009 to 2010 president Jenny McCall. Check it out.
Everybody, I'm Colleen Kohler from the Member Services Committee, and I'm really excited today to have a panel interview with the 3 female presidents of GAWDA. So we have some questions prepared. We have Jenny McCall, Abydee Butler Moore, and Allie Earlbeck. So without further ado, we'll just get right into the questions. I want to thank everybody for joining us. So Jenny, I would love to start with you since you were the first female president of GAWDA. How did you feel when you were first asked to join the executive committee? What was that something that you aspired for, or was that just a natural career progression for you?
All of the above. You know, it it was an honor to you go through all the chairs, and it was an honor to be selected. It was always a dream of mine to become the first female president. I can remember whenever I was sitting in the audience when I was really young, and I saw Randy Squibb go down the aisle, and I thought to myself, that'd be really cool to be the first female president. And I just went from there and got involved, and just sat on committees and just enjoyed the ride. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So what was it like to be the first female president, since, it was something that you aspired to be, and you were looking forward to it for some time, and it must have been, all encompassing being a female president and male dominated association. What was that like for you?
It was challenging, but it was a lot of fun. I had great support. The men in the association were surrounding me. They were taking care of me. They wanted me to prosper, and it was an easy flow. It really went very good. But again, it was the team that my executive team was awesome. Bob Ames was awesome. He was the spear of getting me to where I was, back in 2010. So it wasn't a big challenge. It was a challenge, but it wasn't, because I had a lot of great leaders supporting me.
You also dealt with some big change in your term, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Isn't that when the association changed from Fernley and Fernley to being, self-governed?
Yes, that was very challenging. I think I aged 10 years dealing with, with what we all went through. But again, it was the executive committee that, we all were on one page. We all supported the idea. And yeah, was it tough? Yeah, sure, it was tough. But we had to do what was right for the association. And at that time, we felt like we should go independent through AWS since we were all tied in together.
That's great. That really is remarkable that you went through all of that. And then we'll see, in later discussions too, that Abydee also dealt with some, milestone changes within the industry as well in her term. But what advice would you give any future female leaders in our industry, those getting involved in committees, or just, female leaders in their own businesses? Like, do you have any advice that you would give them?
Yes, get off the sideline and into the game. You know, if you have any aspiration, any dreams, go for it. Life is too short. Um, you know, I went through a lot of management training, and it's not the day that you were born or the day you die. It's your dash. So live life to its fullest.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That is great advice for our young female leaders. All right, so I'm going to pivot to Abydee. So Abydee, obviously, we've grown up together. So I have to ask this for everybody listening. How does it feel to be the legacy to the very notable, visible, and influential president, Jack Butler? So, I mean, those were, some pretty big shoes to fill, but can you share with us how that experience unfolded, being his daughter as you rose through the ranks of the GAWDA board?
Sure. Colleen, if I can be half the business person that he is in my lifetime, I think I'm doing just fine. But I've always grown up around the industry. So following in the trails that he has blazed is really nothing new. He's my biggest coach and mentor. He's my boss. He's my father. He grew up coaching me in sports, and now he just coaches me in business. So it's really cool, and it's an honor. And I really love watching him do what he loves. And it's an inspiration.
Yeah, your dad has, been an inspiration to many, in our association, myself included, and has always, like yourself, encouraged, being involved and having a voice, which is really awesome. And I'm sure, because of his influence, you've always been really involved with GAWDA since I've known you. So can you, share with us any unexpected experiences, that you could prepare as much as you can, but like, was there anything that was unexpected, that you felt like leading GAWDA that you experienced?
Well, you know what? I think what's so interesting, this industry has seen me in every phase of life, right? I was a little kid, probably hiding under the tables at the early NWSA banquets. I've been pregnant at meetings. I've, been through relationships at, phases of my life at meetings. And so really it's an industry that has watched me grow up. And I think in all of those different life milestones, there are different unexpected circumstances, right? I mean, our businesses have been through triumphs and trials, and the industry, I mean, serving the association in 2020, I remember vividly exactly where I was on that call with John Espina. And I'm like, what do you mean we're not going to have an SMC? Like, heck no, charge forward. We prevail. That's what we do as an industry, and kind of having to deal with that. I hate to even use the word again, unprecedented experience of an association that really gained its value in the way that we served our members was based on in-person events. And we had to really get creative and add value and reach members in other ways. And I know, wearing my Butler gas hat, we were so grateful. And I have no idea where we would have been without the consultants and the weekly safety manager roundtables that we were doing with the consultants, because things were just changing so rapidly. And we as an industry were serving medical gases and serving, all of those moments. I think that's probably the most unexpected that it could have gotten. And then serving again in 21 as a result, that's probably the biggest curveball.
Hey, I think that you're also just shared like a really important message to GAWDA members, and I don't know if I know we touch on it some, but the relationships that you build outside of the business, like when you're sharing, your personal life and the friendships that you've made, like when you were young growing up in NWSA, and just like, sharing, your children and your family. I think that that's like a really important message, like to the new members, to know that like it's not just a business association, that, you do build those lifelong friendships, which is really awesome.
Yeah. And it changes generations too. The next generation, it's great to have, our kids play together as an example, Colleen. I mean, it's the future is bright, and there's a whole up and coming generation of little sponges watching us do what we do in the industry.
Yes. Yeah, it is really awesome. Yeah, our daughters are friends, which is really cool. And I still have that picture on my desk of the next gen, which is really funny. But yeah, you also kind of, I was going to ask you specifically, I know that, I can attest that you're somebody who always prepares for the unthinkable, and, you're a strong leader. So when we're talking about the COVID pandemic, that, that's something that you can't really prepare for. And I know that you touched on the roundtables and how the EC supported you, but can you share like what that was really like serving as a president during that time, a little more specifically?
I think what's so interesting is everything's relative. And so I don't really have a comparison point. Maybe similarly to how you asked Jenny, how did it feel to be the first female president of GAWDA? Well, we've never been the first male president of GAWDA. So you just don't know what the difference is. So I don't know any other way other than serving the association in 2020 and 2021. So it just, it was what it was. I'm so grateful for the headquarters team and just their flexibility and their open-mindedness when we had planning committees come together and said, okay, we think the Gaylord, in Nashville is large enough to have good air ventilation. Let's charge on. So we're like, okay, let's charge on. So it was really one of those things where just being really member focused was what it took. What do our members need from GAWDA? And it's really important that GAWDA was where our members needed us to be. And that was heavy in safety consulting. That was getting back to a sense of normal and kind of the show must go on type perspective. And so I just remember being very grateful, really wanting to think outside the box, and then just leaning in hard to the resources that were helping our business and giving back at a time when, we all had to pull together more than ever.
That's great. I also believe that you came up with the idea for the reverse contact booth program. And I think that that was very inventive and a great way to get people engaged. Can you touch on that a little bit for us?
Sure. Yeah, the reverse contact booth is an idea that we piloted at the Seven Springs regional meeting, which I would be remiss if I didn't do shameless plug, June 23rd, 24th, 26th. Please join us. And we have all over 20 distributor unique companies in attendance, have the tables, and the suppliers walk the floor. So it's just a reverse model. Different than the national meetings where the suppliers have the booths and the distributors get to network and walk the floor. We just turn the tables. And it's an idea that just offers something different. And the distributor, we're so fortunate where all of the distributors are really participative and come to that meeting and support it. And the suppliers are so generous with their time and their resources in attending.
I think it's a great idea, and I've participated in it, and I love, bringing fresh thoughts to the association, and it makes, meetings exciting when you're experiencing something new. So I think that was a great ad for our group for sure. Yeah, well, thank you, Abby. I want to pivot now to Allie, and first and foremost, congratulations on being our current president. That's very exciting, and I was wondering, with this being your term, can you share with us? Much like Abydee, you've always been, very vocal and very active in GAWDA. And, you and I being personal friends, I know that you've, always aspired to be, on the executive committee. So can you share what your experience has been serving on that committee?
Absolutely. So, very similar to Abby, I very much feel like I grew up in the association. I started to come to meetings before I was probably even ready to. My dad started to bring me pretty much straight out of high school when I first started trying out the business to see if it was for me. So, I've gone through a lot of milestones in my career and personally, and it has been such a cool full circle experience to finally sit in the president seat. I'll be honest, like when I was younger, kind of similar to Jenny, like when I would see the presidents on stage, I did have a little bit of, hey, that's pretty cool. And that's really, quite the honor. And it would be really awesome if I could do that one day. But when I started to volunteer with GAWDA, like that was not, I didn't even really think it was a possibility, right? Like it was just kind of a dream that I had. I remember my dad asking me at one point, like, would you want to be GAWDA president? And I was like, I don't know. I don't really think so. Right. But once I started to serve as a volunteer and I really started to, get to see how the association worked, it gave me the bug for it. And I just really loved, learning from our peers by volunteering and being a part of the association. And so it's been a really cool experience. I mean, I will also say too, like I'm going on probably, 11, 12 years of volunteering with GAWDA. And I also went, I served my full term on the board and then I was asked to be on the AC. So I am going up on, when I'm exiting the office, I will be, 8 years volunteering with GAWDA. And so I've gotten a chance to see all different types of leaderships and all different types of approaches. And it's really been such a cool learning opportunity for me. And it really did help me find my spot within the industry, that is for sure.
What advice would you give those who just joined the executive committee, having, served on the board for such a long time?
So I would say pick on the experiences of the past presidents. They have lots of knowledge to share and they are very willing to do so. So that is a resource for you. You don't have to figure it out and go it alone. There are other people that have walked in this path before. And so there are plenty of people that are there to help guide you through the experience. And, also too, I would say, slow down and enjoy it. It feels a little overwhelming at times and it feels like it's moving quickly. But, I remember Abydee said to me, on the day that I was inducted, she was like, enjoy it. It's going to go really fast. And she's right. It's only been, a couple months into my term now. And I'm already kind of looking at, okay, well, now I need to start to get ready to pass the baton to to Kevin and, start to get him prepared to serve. So it goes by quickly, enjoy it, lean on the GAWDA headquarters team. They are so strong and they do such a great job at what they do. So, just take some time to enjoy the moment.
For that advice. Also, because you were such a strong volunteer, as was Abydee, or as is Abydee, is there a particular subcommittee that you guys might think could use a little more love for volunteers. Being part of the member services committee, we're always looking for ways to have new members get involved in the association. So would you have any suggestions or want to highlight any particular subcommittees?
Yes. So I will say we have very, very strong committees, but we do have some that maybe don't get the same excitement as the others. And I would say the safety committee is certainly one of them. It really is one of the most important things that we do as an association, which is make sure that our members are running safely. A lot of people, I think, maybe are a little hesitant to join in that committee, thinking that, they have to have decades upon decades of experience in order to be, willing or in order to be ready to serve in a volunteer capacity. And I would say that, I've said it before, it's a great learning opportunity as well to just be a part of those conversations. So, for anybody that's considering volunteering for GAWDA, I would say a really good step is to reach out to the chairs and ask if you can sit in on a meeting and see what the type of work that they do. Each committee is so different. And, it's a great way to meet people as well. So I would say, try to jump in. A lot of the meetings happen virtually. So, see which one you like. But really, all of the committees are looking for new volunteers, fresh perspectives. We really do. Our volunteers carry a lot of the weight for GAWDA. We have, really strong volunteers, and that's what drives our association forward. So, it's just you get out of it as much as you give as a volunteer. So, don't be shy to put your hand up or to jump in. Everybody is always so open. They'll welcome you with open arms to jump in and start to learn and serve.
I think that's really good advice to our members who have not volunteered, that they don't really need to make a full commitment right off the bat, that they can, sit in on a meeting and sit on different subcommittee meetings to kind of see like where they fit. And, maybe that would make it a little less intimidating for our group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, the chairs are very, very welcoming to having anybody new that wants to jump in and join the committee.
Yes, awesome. Okay, so my last question for you is, what exciting things can we expect? No pressure on you at all of this year during your term. Any events that you want to share? Any changes? Any highlights? I have to ask that question for everybody. I know they're anticipating the answer.
So I will say that I am not expecting any crazy changes like Jenny and Abydee, thank goodness. So, luckily we're not going through any pandemics or any, large association shifts in management. So, we get to really focus on content this year, which is what I'm really excited about. I think our industry is really at a turning point, and we'll be looking back in a decade from now saying, oh wow, like that really was kind of a crazy time as we were all kind of figuring out how AI and technology was going to impact our businesses long term. So I'm really excited to be able to lead that conversation. So as I've shared, my theme is the human advantage in the digital age. So I want to make sure that, distributors and suppliers are walking away with very, relevant takeaways for them to apply AI to their business, but also be prepared for also the leadership shift that's going to happen as a result of AI. I think that's a piece that is really important for us to focus on as well, because as AI is going to continue to advance and start to replace a lot of the cognitive tasks that we do, we then are going to have to switch our businesses in terms of, what do we have our key players focus on? And I think, my crystal ball tells me is that, soft skills, EQ, relating to people, being able to rally a team of, towards a common goal is going to be so important. So we're going to be having speakers come in to talk about, how you can build those skills within yourself and your team members. And we're also going to be having conversations about, AI and what that's going to look like for our businesses as well, too. So I'm very excited that I get to be, president during this time, because it is, a topic that is super exciting and interesting to me. So so that's what we have to look forward to. I will also highlight too, we're bringing back the enhanced, GAWDA MBA program, which has been a program which has served for our association very well as a learning opportunity for a lot of our up and comers and key players. And so really excited to be involved with that. We're really excited about our SMC in Oklahoma City. It's a really cool city. And I will say, come ready to be surprised. I think a lot of people will really enjoy it once they get there. And same thing with Boston. Boston is going to be a ton of fun in the Seaport area. So I think our members are not only going to enjoy the area, but we're going to make sure that we are, packing in as much valuable content that is led by the current needs of our association. So they're going to walk home with a lot of takeaways.
I'm very excited. I have not been to Oklahoma City and have yet to, find a reason to go. So I'm excited for the SMC to go there. I've heard great things from the planning committee about it. So I will be there. And obviously Boston is just a hop, skip, and a jump for me. So I'm also excited. We as an association haven't been to Boston in quite some time, right? For a meeting. I can't remember. Have we ever?
Yeah, so Boston we've not done the same with Oklahoma City. So it is they're both new areas, which I think our group is very excited to get to travel and see some different cities. And I will also say we're going to be staying at Omni Properties for both the SMC and the annual this year. And the properties are beautiful and really have modern amenities, and they are a destination in kind of in themselves. So really excited about that as well too.
Well, thank you so much, Allie, Jenny, and Abydee. I really enjoyed this panel conversation. You are all very strong female leaders of our association, and I thank you for your leadership. And you guys empower me and encourage me to be a strong leader as well. And thank you for sharing your experience and expertise to the group. And we look forward to seeing you in person in the upcoming meetings.
GAWDA Media is the go-to resource for news and information about the gases and welding industry. Through our wide variety of publication platforms, GAWDA Media keeps our members up to date on all of the most breaking news, emerging trends, and member events in the industry. Want to get your company's message seen? We have a quarterly print publication, a twice-monthly newsletter, an online buyer's guide, and a twice-monthly news show. If it's happening at Gases and Welding, it's happening on GAWDA Media. Want to learn more? Contact your GAWDA Media representative today. Today's member news segment is brought to you by Anthony Carts. Check out the new CB6 6C 2WL HT cylinder cradle with full 360-degree mobility and heavy-duty handling today. This cradle is a rugged and highly maneuverable solution for transporting and storing industrial gas cylinders with ease. Whether you're operating in a fabrication shop, gas distribution center, or field service operation, the CB6 6C 2WL HT offers unmatched versatility and strength. Learn more or request a quote at Anthony's website, www.anthonycarts.com. We begin today's member news segment with some sad news. GAWDA extends its condolences to the friends and family of Earl Alexander, who passed away on December 22nd. Earl was the president of A&E Mill and Welding Supply. Earl Alexander's life was a testament to the values of hard work, dedication, and family, and his memory will forever be cherished by those who loved him and were inspired by his example. In happier news, save the date for the 2026 IWDC Sales and Purchasing Convention, which will take place from May 31st to June 2nd in Louisville, Kentucky. Walter Surface Technologies announced that it had acquired Hermes North America, a leading supplier of coated abrasives with a strong reputation for technical excellence and customer-focused performance. Control Devices announced that it had acquired Sherwood Valve. Helget Gas Products acquired Sesco, a Northwest Arkansas-based beverage gas and equipment provider headquartered in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Air Liquide Canada acquired Barry Hamill Limited. Lambton Welding named Mike Sabin as its new Chief Financial Officer. Elite Cryogenics announced a new state-of-the-art blast and paint booth, which will speed up project timelines. Wesco Gas and Welding Supply opened a new location in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. And finally, Texas Trailer Corporation completed its 3-year ASME NBIC joint review. To learn more about any of these member news items or to submit member news of your own, read the complete February 1st issue of the GAWDA Connection in your email inbox today or by clicking the link in the description below. And that's our show for this month. Once again, registration is open now for GAWDA's first 3 regional meetings of the year. Registration for the SMC will open up later this month. We can't wait to see you in person at one of this year's GAWDA meetings. For all of us here at GAWDA TV, this is Steve Guglielmo signing off.